Hey, it's Amethyst Virgo. I'm back with another video in the House Axis series. First talking about 6 through 12th house, 6 and 12th house. If you have placements in those houses, feel free to check it out. Now I'm going to jump into 5th and 11th. Before I do that, if you are on TikTok, feel free to follow me on at Amethyst Virgo Astrology. Sometimes I will post some shorter videos there that I won't make it over here. Sometimes they will, but not all the time. So we're gonna jump into it. So I have placement. I have a playlist already where I go through 1st through 12th houses. I already did that, but I think it's very important in astrology to talk about balance and talk about polarizing energy, because that is really when we look at the astrological wheel, right? We see that there's a need for balance and that there are oppositions in terms of what does the 6th house mean versus 12th, and the 5th versus the 11th. So I'm going to jump into this. If you have placements in the 5th and 11th house specifically, this is going to be really helpful for you. Or maybe you have transits in the 5th and 11th house right now, or you're just curious. I will also note the degree matters. So really look at the degree of the planets in those houses, because if someone has Venus in Gemini at the 0 degree in the house, in the 5th house, but then they have Mars in Sagittarius at the 2nd degree in the 11th house, that's a clear opposition, right? Those degrees are close enough that this is going to impact this individual versus an individual that has Venus and Gemini at the 1st degree in the 5th house and Mars in Sagittarius 29th degree in the 11th house. Those are not creating a true opposition, right? Now, by sign, they are. So we can still see the themes of Mars and Sag in the 11th house and what that could mean for a person. But the impact between, or the connection between the relationship between Mars and Venus would be a little bit less serious for that individual, because the degrees are not contact. They're not in contact, if that makes sense. Okay. All right. So just wanted to share that it's very different. It's like living in the same house as your sibling versus not living with your sibling, right? Your sibling lives with the other parent, right? You're going to have less contact versus the person who's with the sibling all the time. Look at it like that. So when we think of the 5th versus the 11th, look at where they are. The 5th house is after the 4th house. And so the 5th house is where we move away a little bit away from our family and we get really, really into our joy. What do we like personally? What do we like? What do we enjoy? Where are our talents? Who are we away from our family? Now, interestingly enough, the 5th house is also associated with children. And so I like to use the 5th house a lot to talk about to people about, more specifically, not like, will you have children or not? I don't, want to get into all of those types of predictions, but there is a way to predict for some people, like how many children or what children, if they'll have children, but is a sensitive topic. So I don't feel like I'm the person to go tell someone if they're going to have kids or not. But I can tell someone who's a parent, like what type of parent you are, what type, right? We can look at what planets are there and what's on the cusp. So after the 4th house of the family you're born into, the house of the moon and mom and all that, now the 5th house can show your own children, right? So see how the sequence it moves. And so the thing we also want to understand about the 5th house is it's all the things that are supposed to bring us joy. It is lighthearted energy. It is not the 8th house. Okay, this is not a very serious house. Now you can say, well, wait, but children are there, and obviously having a child is a serious experience. But it's lighthearted. It is creative energy. The 5th house are the things that we enjoy. It is associated with topics like events, parties, competition, sports, gambling, indulging, pleasures, dating, flirting. It's all the things that are kind of just fun are in the 5th house. Now, the problem sometimes can happen, and I'll probably dive a little bit more into this, is when people are all 5th house, they're all fun, they're all play. They can feel sometimes that they're not connected to anything beyond themselves. And I think even when people claim to be introverts are real, I'm one, but when you have 11th house placements, you are a part of something. I'm going to tell you, okay? You are part of something. When you have 11th house placements, you are part of something bigger than yourself, an organization, a network of people, a group, a collective of people that are fighting for something, or a collective of people that have shared ideals, shared belief, a shared mission. When you have 11th house placements, being a part of something, an organization, a sports team, a group, a work clubs, things like that is going to be essential to you, especially if you learn to balance it. Okay. Now you can have people that struggle, because you can say, wait a minute, someone might say I have 11th house placements. I have Saturn and Pluto there. And you might struggle with power and control in groups. You might struggle people trying to overpower you, or you might struggle trying to release some of your power to really get along with people. So I do want to share that either way, the themes are still going to be there. Think of the fifth house, again, it's what I enjoy. It is creative energy. It is the sun. The sun rules the fifth house. We are thinking of vitality. We are thinking of things that bring us joy, happiness, such and such. The 11th house, it's a little bit more of a serious endeavor that is outside of ourselves. It is traditionally ruled by Saturn. We know Saturn deals with responsibility. It is also ruled by Uranus in modern astrology. Uranus deals with disruption. Uranus deals with collective groups in terms of how do we revolutionize things? How do we make everything better for other people by disrupting anything that is not progressing? All right, think of Uranus as progression, okay? Now, again, I talked about the fifth house being 1 over from the fourth. We're dealing with the 11th house, 1 over from the 10th house of career and goals. So think about it, reputation, goal, career. And after that, we have the 11th house, where that's why sometimes the 11th house can be associated with business acquaintances. Traditionally, there was a lot of emphasis on a positive, like when you had positive or benefic planets in that 11th house, it supported people who were into business. Is the income you're going to get from other people, okay, in terms of business endeavors, in terms of likability. Think of the 11th house can be social. Okay, who you socialize with, okay? The 11th house are, again, in groups, organizations, and networks. Also, because it's in the 5th house is children that you have, the 11th house can sometimes represent stepchildren or sometimes even son or daughter-in-law. Some astrologers use the 11th house as son and daughter-in-law. So these are people that may not be blood related, but they are still in some way extension of your children, so to speak, can be the 11th house, okay? So remember, the 11th house are things beyond what are super, super personal or super, we're not making as much conscious decision with the 11th house. We are orienting ourselves to an ideal. We are around people that have a similar mindset as us. Innovative energy, the 11th house, rallies, community events, organizations, right? And these are things that you might not immediately gain from. Remember, 11th house, 5th house is personal. This is what I like. And the 5th house can involve other people. We just talked about children and dating and things like that. We just talked about people the 5th house can be. The 11th house is, it's your feeling of belonging. You have to do something for the collective of people you are involved with, right? It's not just about what I want, what I want. The 11th house, it's not about you. It's not, right? And so when you have 11th house placements and 5th house placements, sometimes people can struggle with balance of all fun, right? The person who's like, yeah, I know all the things I love to do, but I don't feel connected to other people. I don't feel like I belong. You could have 11th house placements. You could have an empty 11th house. Or you can simply have 11th house energy that makes it hard. You get a person that's got the sun and Venus in the 5th house, but they got sun and Saturn and Pluto in the 11th house. So they have power struggles with other people when they're in groups. They work a little bit better when they're around people that are feeding into them, 5th house, right? People that, oh, you're so great at that, right? Like praise them for their talents, but then you have to go and figure out how to relate to other people that have a shared vision and shared understanding. So that person's chart may be them learning how to get along with people in a group setting, learning how to have shared power, shared distribution of power, or maybe you are responsible for other people. Saturn rules the 11th house. And if you have Saturn in that 11th house in your chart, you are responsible for a collective of people. You are in charge, Mars maybe, leader. You are in charge of something that can be an organization, a group. You are the leader. You are in some way, you have to help other people understand how important something is. That can feel like a lot of pressure. So you can sometimes also have people who have so much 11th house energy, or they're operating from their 11th house, or maybe they have retrograde 5th house. So it's easier for you to operate from the 11th house of being of use to people, of being, a leader, or being the community leader, or you are the captain of something, or you are the head of something, right? You think of the person that pours so much into being a part of a PTA mom, right? Like type of energy, someone is, right? Like let's say someone's in 11th house and they have like maybe moon in Cancer, I don't know, moon in Leo children, right? But then their moon's there, but then like they have 5th house placements, but their 5th house, they don't know what they are outside of that group. They don't know what they like. They don't know what to do. So it is going to matter on the individual chart, the individual person, what it will mean for you. This video is not going to explain specifically what it's going to mean for you because that involves a reading. but it will help you understand the themes and what you might encounter along the way. About the 11th house being ruled by Saturn, remember that is an obligation, it's a duty. Who are you here to work for? Remember, Saturn also rules the 10th house. And so we get to the 11th house, Saturn rules that, and the modern ruler is Uranus. I talked about Uranus being about collectivity, right? Who are you here to do things for? So when you have 11th house placement, it's not just about you. It doesn't mean you can't highlight your best traits, because your 5th house is going to help you be confident. You have to work on your 5th house, because that's where you're going to feel like, this is who I am, this is what I'm confident about. But when you translate it to the 11th house, how does that look like when you actually use your talents and strengths in terms of how you deal with other people, the friendship groups you have? What role do you play? Right? So we look here, it's like 11th house energy is going to draw people to you who need something from you, but it's a big lift because it is something that requires shared ideals, views on society, on community. What does it look like? What does it mean to be a part of a group? You think about a person who's a Mars and Pisces in the 11th house, fighting on the behalf of other people who can't stand up for themselves, right? Maybe. Then you have Sun in Virgo. Sun in Virgo. Jupiter in Virgo in that 5th house. So you get joy from being seen, of being recognized, maybe even for what you do for others, for your service. But Pisces and Virgo are both signs that can deal with detaching the ego. So Virgo, it's through the collective efforts. It's through, I'm going to do these things. I'm going to make sure things are organized. I'm going to make sure things are effective for people. Pisces, I have compassion. I'm going to treat people with compassion. I'm going to be kind. I'm going to be benevolent. I'm going to be charitable. So Virgo and Pisces, especially oppositions, have to be careful with this axis, because again, the 5th house is, okay, personalized. You're personal now. You believe this is who you are, right? This is who you are, being of service to people. And there's nothing wrong with helping people and being of service, because we can't do things alone. We can't do everything alone. But the 11th house, that Mars, you're an activist and you're passionate about it. But how do you blend the two so you're not losing sight of the things that you really, really need to do personally for yourself? So I think that can be a hard energy. Mars, not just Mars, but Virgo and Pisces, 5th and 11th house. But what's great about it is if a Virgo is in the 5th house, it gives you you're a confident Virgo. The type of Virgo that's lacks confidence. You're not the type of Virgo the thing with Virgo's confidence is Virgo second guesses. Virgo overthinks. But if you have Virgo in the 5th house, that's more of I'm confident in what I'm doing. I know what I'm doing is right. And I know, but it also can be a little bit of a savior complex if somebody has like a really intense planet in that 11th house in Pisces. Mars, Saturn, something like that. Okay. Now, when you overdo it, right? 11th house, I'm here for the cause. I'm here for my friends. I'm always busy. I'm always doing something, right? And you lose out on the 5th house things that you need, though. Sometimes you got to take a break. You want to do all these events and all these friends, and you want to be a speaker at your friend's thing and do all these things. And the 5th house is going to remind you, have you taken time to do something for yourself lately that you enjoy? Or are you just doing things because this is the role you play? Think about that 11th house as that role. This is the role you play in this. And it can be a great beneficial placement, but it also can be a placement where people can struggle with being obligated. Remember, Saturn is the ruler, one of the traditional ruler of 11th house. You are obligated to do something for society, for the collective here. Now, I talked about what is next, right? Think about it. 5th house, what is next? After the 5th house of fun and just all these things you want to do is the 6th house responsibility. But through the 5th house, you get to see, right, what I enjoy and what am I going to take serious, though? Because the 6th house then is when you actually apply something to work on it, when you are involving something in your daily life. So people that want to have too much fun, right? Your 6th house is going to show you the area you need to have responsibility in. With the 11th house, you can get so caught up in societal ideals. That can sometimes be the thing, an issue. We get so caught up in, and people can become indoctrinated through the 11th house, especially if a person has 11th and 9th house placements, unless they have something going on in those houses like Jupiter, Neptune, right? Pluto, outer planets in the 9th and the 12th house. 9th and 11th house. You could be very, very influenced by societal trends. Now, you could be the spokesperson, you could be the leader, and you could be the person who's innovative, or sometimes it can end up being situations where you are indoctrinated yourself. because you need to belong so much to that 11th house. But you can lose sight on the intrinsic need for your soul to understand life in a way that is more profound than just belonging to something and being a part of a group and being accepted. Because then what's after the 11th? The 12th. When we talk about karma, we talk about spirituality, we talk about isolation, because you can get so tired out in that 11th house, right? That you got to retreat to the 12th house. And people with 12th house placements know about that isolation, that solitude place, right? Sometimes people with the 11th house, especially if you start out early in life, so you 5th house placements, maybe that 5th house, maybe you have Mercury in retrograde. You struggle with communicating your own thoughts, your own pleasures, your own needs, right? You might be very great, your tone of voice, the way you speak to people, Mercury in the 5th house. You're funny, but you struggle sometimes to really clearly say what you want to say. What are your actual thoughts and opinions? Or you over rely on humor. Then you have 11th house energy. And from an early age, you've always belonged. Maybe there's something really great about you. Maybe you're very attractive. Maybe people think you're so funny. People think you're so, right? So people from an early age ushered you to a group setting and you feel like this is great. But you haven't worked on that 5th house placement. You don't feel fully confident outside of the group, outside of what the group's approval is. You have to be careful because 11th house placements, especially when we look at aspects and other planets making contact with whatever's in your house, right? Of too much approval and not enough approval of yourself through the 5th house, right? You need approval. You need a stamp of approval. You need a group of people. You need people to agree with you, or you need to feel that you're in charge of a group. Some people you can see, some of the stronger planets, you could have Sun, you could have Saturn, you could have Pluto there, you could have Mars, and that might be your identity. Like, I'm in charge of this group. This gives me purpose. But what happens when that group is not there? What happens when the organization dissolves? Who are you? What happens when your friend group, you kind of lose contact with certain people, right? What happens when you leave that place where you had all these friends? Who are you? So when you have a lot of 11th house energy, you want to just be mindful of still tapping into that 5th house of fun, of pleasure, the things that you enjoy, things you like. Now, the 5th house, could you indulge too much? Yes. You can indulge so much in the fun stuff that you forget the importance of belonging to something 11th house. You forget the importance of understanding how to connect to people through life experiences, but also through our shared vision and understanding of how we want to approach society, right? We aren't in a silo. We aren't, right? We aren't. Even if you're an introvert, you're not in a silo. So the 11th house helps you feel a sense of, recognized. I know somebody that thinks like me. I know that I'm a part of a community of people that have a shared vision, the same passion and understanding. I talked before the 6th and the 12th house that it is easier to function through the 6th house because the 12th house is nebulous. It is ruled by Neptune. It is traditionally ruled by Jupiter. The 12th house can feel very disconnected at times. So it's easier to operate from your 6th. Where is it easiest for people to operate versus 5th and 11th? It'll depend on the chart. But a lot of times, it'll depend. I think for 5th and 11th house people, it's more about what is in there. It's very different than 6th and the 12th house. 12th house is very confusing for people that resonate mostly with their 5th house energy because it's like it makes sense to them. They understand it. This is who I am. But then you can sometimes be confident but still struggle to find your people, your tribe, who you belong to, who is going to, validate the things you believe and you think, because why is the 11th house all the way away from our 3rd and our 4th house? Our 3rd, our 4th, even our 5th house, children. 8th and 7th, marriage, commitment, because the 11th is where we go to people that we don't necessarily have a personal obligation to, we don't have an emotional obligation to, but we have an obligation to creating something that is going to have thinkers, people who think. Remember, thinkers, we're thinking of Uranus, right? Because you can have people that revolutionize 11th house placements. You can have people that jolt things, people that are very inventive, people that are very creative in terms of ideas. 5th house is creative in terms of things. Find a lot of creative people who can create things, objects, art, music. 5th house. The 11th house is creative thought, being inventive, having a genius type of mindset. So the 11th house can be easier for people who have been ushered into that, people that are belonging to something, people who easily fit into a group. But so you can have people that, depending on your chart, depending on who you are, depending on your personal experience, you can thrive in the 11th house because you belong and you're popular and people like you. You have likability, but you don't ever want to lose the track of who you really are at the core, because sometimes that energy can be overwhelming. Having to constantly be a part of something where, yes, you have shared ideals to the 11th house, but it doesn't mean you agree on every single thing. And at the end of the day, through the 5th house, we have to know who we are. When you go home or when you are away from people, you have to find something that brings you joy, that brings you a sense of happiness. And that the 5th house is so personal. It is like this inner light. Remember, the 11th house is more, it can be more detached from what is personal. So sometimes even when you see Venus in that 5th house, that person's going to come off very different than a person with Venus in the 11th house, because Venus in the 11th house can show appreciation and love for groups and organizations and friends, but not always be so open to people that they're actually related to or people that they are in relationships with. Whereas Venus in 5th, you will see typically a doting person, a doting parent, someone who is also very in love with the idea of love, the idea of not just love, but like flirtation and dating. Venus in the 11th house, no, they might have more of a connection to their friends, to their organizations, to their groups. They're more into friends than true romance, okay? So it really is going to matter what planet is there. That moon in the 11th house person needs to feel connected to something. That moon in the 5th house person needs to find what they enjoy and make sure that they give themselves time to, privately, do the things that they like without people necessarily having to be around. That moon in 5th house person needs more praise and appreciation for the things that they naturally do. That moon in the 11th house person needs more validation for what they may think, for what they may contribute. The 5th house is not worried about what it contributes. This is not a 6th house placement, okay? If you're dealing with, so I think that kind of sums up this opposition of the 5th versus the 11th house, okay? Always understand the 5th is your personal joy. It is where you're going to get your confidence. It is where you're going to feel good about yourself without needing validation, okay? Now, could some people need more validation too? Yeah. You see a moon in Leo in the 5th house person, oh yeah. The things that they create. The 11th house is who we are among other people, what role we play, which could be dramatically different than the role we play in our 4th house around those types of people. So it really is about understanding the importance of both. The 11th house, where do I belong? And if you don't have a group of people, the 11th house is not about having 400 friends. It is about understanding where you are in regards to society, understanding what views you have and what you stand for and what you uphold. The 11th house can also be online. It can be social media. 11th house can represent like online groups and communities as well. And so community doesn't have to be it's 500 people, but the 11th house is where we go to feel like we have people we can relate to. We have a group of people that we can relate to. We are part of something that is bigger than just us and what we want, right? Because that is a key part of the human experience, regardless of what we think about how confident we are and how isolated we want to be and how independent we are. There is a need for people to feel validated through people, because it is like these people, like groups, have a certain power. To be accepted by multiple people feels like a sort of validation, and it can represent people having, and even people having control or influence over a group. You got that Pluto, you got that Saturn and Mars in that 11th house. That can feel good, okay? Because remember, the 11th house aren't people obligated to us. We might have an obligation, but the 11th house people are obligated to the cause, right? We're obligated to what this means. This friendship group, we're obligated to this idea of friendship, or we're obligated to this bowling league. We're obligated to this fraternity, 11th house, right? We're obligated to this community group. We're obligated to, outreach, whatever it is, the 11th house, we're obligated to something, but it's not people's individual needs, if that makes sense. Okay. So that is it for this video. Hope this made sense for some of y'all. The next video that was requested for this series was the 1st and 7th house, which I think will be really interesting because that is a very interesting axis, but feel free to request any of the other ones that you want me to do after the 1st and 7th.